Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal, and patch 11.1 will be arriving to PTR oh so soon, with us finally getting our first preview for the Season 2 content of the War Within, with it also bringing in a ton of new class revamps. While the PTR is not available for testing just yet, they did release a massive list of class patch notes going over all of the major updates that's arriving in the near future. And while we can't actually playtest all of these changes, I did want to highlight and talk about them, some of the biggest revamps that are arriving with a seasonal update. This is a pretty long video, so I just kind of want to jump into it as soon as possible, but we do have chapter marks down below for you to skip out to the relevant sections for all of the different classes that are getting some of the biggest changes, with this looking like a fairly sizable update for the War Within expansion going forward. As always, if you want to see more guides and updates for the patch 11.1 content as soon as it hits PTR, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe. But right now, let's dive into this newest set of new class revamps in the patch notes. I definitely want to go over a lot of these class changes in more detail once 11.1 PTR finally hits the live realms, but for now I did want to go over some of the highlights from the patch notes that we have so far. Starting with classes in an alphabetical order, mostly focusing on anybody that's getting major big new changes like the Demon Hunter. With Demon Hunters, I've seen a number of improvements, some big, some small, like an improvement to the ability of Spectral Sight, which is how they're able to find stealthy characters, but also certain demons and a variety of entities when they are in stealth, when they're hidden away, or for certain dungeon mechanics even, like from some of the dungeons from the expansion of Legion. Essentially, for PvP purposes, they removed the ability for Spectral Sight to break on damage. It can now only be removed as either through a magic dispel or from a crowd control by an enemy, which is amazing for PvP content, but also it no longer has as heavy of movement speed reduction for Demon Hunters, which makes it even more usable. Having Demon Hunters are getting a bunch of new talents, but two of the most important ones I think are going to get players excited about, depending on which version of Demon Hunter you played from back in the day. One of these talents is called Screaming Brutality, which is basically the Dragonflight Season 3 tier set, where you were able to use Blade Dance ability to automatically send throw glaives at your targets, which made throw glaive focus builds much stronger without having you necessarily to press the throw glaive button ability, offering amazing cleave damage and excellent sustain damage, while also a lot more synergy with throw glaive focus talents. Then there's also a different version of Cycle of Hatred talent that's also been adjusted by quite a bit, and it more or less reminds me of Radon's Cascading Eyes, with a new talent reading that Eye Beam now reduces the cooldown of your next Eye Beam, stacking up to 20 times maximum, which reminds me of the remaining cooldown of Eye Beams reduced by 0.3 seconds each time you hit an enemy with an Eye Beam. So potentially Demon Hunters may be able to use Eye Beam a lot more aggressively going forward, which has a number of different synergies within its spec, but also within its class talents that could offer him fantastic AoE output. Outside of that, we also have a couple of additions for Druids as well as Hunters, some of the more major reworks, like actual redesigns coming out to some of the talent trees that really needed them. First one being for that of a Druid, which has been kind of unwieldy for a very long while and has felt very restricted for many players with its first iteration during Dragonflight, second iteration in War Within, and now they're trying another stab at it, and this one looks a lot more promising. To give you an idea of what is changed with the talent tree, we have the original as well as the new version over next to it, but there's a variety of different talents, like some of the basic quality of life defenses and utility options that have been much easier made to acquire. We have things such as the Ursoc Spirit, for example, being able to cleanse your allies. Even picking up Skull Bash, for instance, has been moved towards to be more centralized, so even Restoration Druids and Balance Druids get a different version of it, but for Resto to at least be able to try to pick up a Skull Bash ability, at least they're trying to make it a little bit better in terms of overall functionality. But a lot of the utility talents when it comes to defenses or how you modify some of your abilities if you're playing like a hybrid build, all of those have been adjusted, and the cost of them have been reduced drastically as well, with many of the talents only costing one single node. Then there's some new options like a competing talent with renewal called Asena's Renewal. Whenever you get hit for 12% of your maximum health, you instantly heal for 10% of it immediately, with its effect working every 30 seconds, which can be great for personal Druid survivability. Things like Cyclone as well as Soothe are now just condensed into a single talent node that goes down into things like Stampeding Roar with some of the more regular options such as Lekara's Teachings. Below Lekara's Teachings around it are also some of the talent nodes in order to give you a little bit of hybrid capability, like for Resto in particular, like increasing the damage of your Bite and Mauls, or Moonfire and Sunfire, but also Circle of the Wild and Circle of the Heavens, which can either buff the damage of physical abilities or magic abilities for the hybrid capabilities. Over on the right hand side, we have a new talent called Symbiotic Relationship, where you form a bond with an ally. Any self-healing you do, a portion of that healing goes also to your ally, and anytime you heal that bonded ally, a portion of that healing comes back to you as well. So that can be really nice in a more close-knit environment like PvP or potentially Mythic Plus dungeons. Things such as Well-Honed Instincts, defenses that are that good are no longer capsules that are but are much easier to reach, with even new nodes in order to further amplify it or adjust it in order for you to pick up some of the other defensive options and utility options further into the talent tree, which looks a lot better overall. Over in the Guardian talent tree, for the most part, the tree looks about the same, but there's also micro adjustments here and there, which I would love to check out once they're finally available for testing on PTR. But one of the new talents that's super exciting helps out Guardian with one of the biggest cruxes, which is magic damage. Guardians are not really good at taking the amount of magic damage compared to other classes, so they're trying to help them out with Ursul's Warding, where you gain magic damage reduction equal to a portion of your damage reduction based on armor. So up to 10% of that armor can now go into that magic damage reduction, which can help them deal with some of the magic damage abilities to overlap them together with some of their different cooldowns and give them overall better fortitude against damage that normally pierces past their thick armor. Then there's specs like Resto Druid, where they're actually changing the way the mastery works. The mastery normally works off of their healing over time effects, increasing their healing by a portion based on your mastery for each of your restoration healing over time effects. So the more hots you can stack up on a single ally, the more overlapping bonuses that those healing over time effects have. That does mean that Resto Druids are then forced to deal with a significant bit of a ramp up effectiveness that they have to play around with when it comes to getting some of the hots up and running. So to reduce some of the ramp up, they're actually changing the way the mastery works. Right now, the mastery for 11.1 is getting amped up by 30% effectiveness. However, that overall bonus effectiveness is reduced for every healing over time effect that you have, which means if, let's say, you use all of the talents to juice up your rejuvenation to be the strongest single heal on an ally, like if you make that type of a build specifically so you can spread it to multiple allies, that mastery is not going to have those overlapping benefits from each hot, but that one healing over time could be plenty effective. However, it still does allow you to scale it up. So if you put a rejuve on an ally and, let's say, a wild growth, it does reduce that mastery bolstering effect, but it does allow those now two hots to benefit from mastery amplifying one another. So there's still scaling potential with multiple hots, but if, let's say, you are playing around a single powerful hot of rejuvenation, for example, trying to amplify it as much as you can, which is something you normally would do in places like Mythic Plus, for example. You won't overlap too many hot effects at the same time. Then those singular healing over time effects will be a lot stronger all on their own, which will hopefully let Restoration still have this ramping component, but not be completely as punished by being unable to ramp up their healing fast enough or predict damage going out. For the classic Evoker, we see a number of changes, primarily to make one of the weaker hero specs of Flame Shaper better for both Devastation, which is currently super heavily underperforming for, but also better for Preservation as well, with new talents around Flame Shaper to improve the playstyle, which is primarily focused around damage over time or healing over time, which you can use the Engulf ability on to empower it further, and it plays around the Fire Breath ability or Dream Breath, and they're really trying to narrow it down to make both of those empowerment abilities better. One for Devastation, one for Preservation. Outside of that, the only other big rework coming out to the Evoker is a massive change to Augmentation, with the ability of Ebb and Might no longer affecting tanks or healers. This is a huge change to how Evokers will perform within dungeon content, and will likely impact their viability going forward, where right now Evokers are almost mandatory in some of the higher end content, which makes them very popular in both high dungeons, but also in even basic lower-end dungeons, since many players see them being played a lot at the top end, so they're more likely to invite him even in the middle end, bottom end. Like, you don't necessarily need an Evoker for a +4 Mythic Plus, not really, but a lot more players are seeing everybody play them, so they're looking out for them every time they can. But this is a pretty big change. It no longer buff up your tanks or healers, which will change the whole dynamic in M+ in particular, but it also empowers the DPS of that group even further, so their damage and performance shouldn't be affected too much. But it also affects him in raids as well. Does make it a little harder for them to accidentally empower the wrong target in a raid scenario, but it does, I think, make him a little more consistent within raiding, because normally position is a pretty big thing, where they try to not get too close to healers and tanks if possible. But this is going to be a pretty noticeable change for Augmentation going forward, and definitely needs to be tested once 11.1 hits the PTR realms. The class of Hunter is also going through a number of changes, with Marksmanship and Pack Leader getting fairly sizable reworks. First of all, Pack Leader, which is meant to almost embody a Rexer type of playstyle where you could just summon these beasts under your command. They're really trying to make that class fantasy really stick for Pack Leader, which is going to be a lot less passive. The whole mechanic of Vicious Hunt, which just amplifies your kill commands after your kill command, is alright. It works okay, it deals additional damage, but it's not as interactive as many players want it to be. So they changed it about quite a bit to convert it to a new ability called Howl of the Pack, where instead, every 30 seconds you'll then summon either a bear, a wyvern, or a boar to leap into the fray. And each pet does a different thing. The bear leaps in, rends the flesh of enemies for a heavy dot damage. Wyvern runs in and increases the effectiveness of you on all of your pets. The boar will charge to your target, dealing heavy damage single target, but also moderate damage to all other enemies it passes through. So it has a little bit of a positional requirement to it, and this happens every 30 seconds with many other cooldowns to help reduce the cooldown of Howl of the Pack. But also the bear, the wyvern, and the boar attacks will interact with the Beast Mastery and Survival Hunter kits, either amplifying certain spells to encourage you to play certain builds, or even reducing the cooldown of other abilities, which is going to make Pack Leaders so much better and so much more interactive to really embrace the whole Rexar class fantasy, with you literally summoning a wyvern, a boar, and Misha to your aid, which is so exciting for me. The next pick to see a significant rework is the Marksmanship Hunter, which normally play around the talent of Lone Wolf. This means that Marksmanship is actually encouraged to sacrifice not having a pet, but that does limit them with some of the pet utility, which they definitely lack. Normally pets are set up into 3 different categories: either a Lust pet that has a leech benefit, where you can gain a little bit more healing based on damage, but also bloodlust your allies. Those are being from the Ferocity school. Then there's Tenacity pets, which offer you better personal defense with Fortification of the Bear, as well as passive health increase. And then there's Cunning, which can help free you or an ally from a slow-in effect or root effect, but also grant you some baseline movement speed. And Marksmanship, because it doesn't really utilize pets like BM or Survival, it can miss out on those things sorely. So instead, they granted it a new passive effect, where instead of having a pet, they will instead get Eyes in the Sky passive, which allows them to gain an aid of a Spotting Eagle. This isn't necessarily a combat pet, but rather one that's up in the air all on its own, and then it can swoop in for a certain damage ability or to allow you some extra additional utility without necessarily being a pet that's constantly active for you in combat. And they're even adding talents to synergize with that pet specifically. The pet will function off of the effect of Precise Shots, where every time you consume Precise Shots, there's a 30% chance that the Spotting Eagle will rapidly descend down from the skies, mark your target, and then it causes your next aim shot to deal additional damage to that target, with multiple times being able to scale it. Because the Eagle isn't a combat pet, you still get benefits from your Lone Wolf, but the Eagle comes with some of those pet-like benefits, like Harrier's Cry, where your Eagle will descend from the skies and use a Bloodlust effect like a Ferocity pet. So you get a baseline Bloodlust as a Marksmanship Hunter. But you could also learn your Eagle new effects like Tenacious Talent, or give him a Cunning Mastery, where with Tenacious will grant you 5% more health and reduce damage taken, very similar to Tenacious pets, or a Cunning Mastery where it'll give you Master's Call, so your Eagle can use that now and grant you additional movement speed. So Marksmanship gains all the utility of BM and Survival, which is very exciting. Outside of this, the Marksmanship talent tree will look very different compared to the new version, and you'll get a bunch of new talents like a choice between Trick Shots, which functions just like the original Trick Shots, or Aspect of the Hydra, where Aim Shot, Rapid Fire, and Arcane Shot will now hit a secondary target for 40% of their damage, which gives you better cleave. There's plenty of talents that synergize with your Spotter's Mark and your Spotter's Eagle that can further amplify its effectiveness with improved Spotter's Mark, further increasing the damage of the aim shot by 10% additional chance. Further increasing the damage of Spotter's Mark aim shot combo by 20%. The Eagle has even further implications such as Feathered Frenzy. True Shot now sends your Spotted Eagle into a frenzy, instantly applying Spotter's Mark to your target, and during True Shot, your chance to reapply a Spotter's Mark to a target is increased by 50%. Consuming Spotter's Mark reduces the cooldown of aim shot by 2 seconds, and the Spotter's Mark can also now be applied to multiple targets, which gives you much better cleave capabilities. And one of the better talents that Marksmanship is getting is Double Tap. It is making a proper return in 11.1, where casting True Shot now grants you Double Tap, the original version, causing your aim shot to fire a shot again at 100% power, or your next rapid fire will fire at 100% additional shots during its channel. This does mean if you want to get a lot of uses out of Double Tap, you're probably going to go into calling the shots for better cooldown reduction for your True Shot, which now will function off of Spotter's Mark, so the more marks you can generate and consume, the faster you gain the ability. But at the very least, it does bring back for Marksmanship one of the more fun talents that gave you so much extra burst damage, and I think it's probably going to make the spec even stronger because of its full-on crit damage functionality. The Cause of Praise is also another one that's going through a noticeable amount of changes, primarily to its two healing specs, Discipline as well as Holy, which are both going to be receiving different changes to achieve different goals. For Disc in particular, their goal is to reduce the number of cooldowns that Disc has to manage. There's so many bigger cooldowns, but also micro cooldowns that you need to line up together in order to create the best combo as either healing output as an Oracle healer or as a Void Weaver, which Void Weaver is usually the more popular choice for the PvE and content like raids and dungeons. So they're granting them a number of new talents such as Divine Procession, where Smite can now extend the duration of an existing atonement by 3 seconds, which is basically a Dragonfly tier set. Evangelism, a button that I feel like I haven't played in a very long while. They're buffing it back up as well a little. Not only is it going to heal all targets with an atonement for 4,200% of spell power split amongst targets with an atonement, but it also will still extend the duration of those atonements by 6 seconds. We're trying to make it, I think, a better button in M+ for emergency healing or even in raid content as well. The button of Shadow Ward Pain usually gets converted into Purge the Wicked, but they're trying to make Shadow Ward Pain basically get a lot of this Purge the Wicked functionality baseline by buffing the hell out of Shadow Ward Pain. Instead of having Purge the Wicked change the ability, it just is going to be a new talent that allow Purge the Wicked or Shadow Ward Pain to be spread to targets more easily, so you don't necessarily have to invest into this talent as a mandatory pick for all builds out there, which means a little bit more freedom. And the Mindbender playstyle with the Void Summoner, they're trying to change it up a little bit to have the cooldown reduction not come from smites, but only from Mind Blasts and Penances, but be double as effective, so you don't only necessarily really need to manage Penance and Mind Blast as the core buttons for your gameplay that may potentially give you a few free globals in between. You never know what kind of situations you're in, but currently priests are in such a situation where if they miss globals on the smites, it doesn't help them get as many blasts or penances to get Void Summoner value. But with this change, hopefully as long as you get in blasts and penances out of the way, then you're getting a lot of the cooldown reduction while being able to fill your globals in between with other spells as the situation needs you to fill it. Holy Priest is another spec that's also going to go through a sizable change to those spec talents, but they're also getting some new ones as well, like Lasting Word, similar to how Priest got the Dragonflight's old tier set, so does Holy. Lasting Words will allow Holy Word Serenity to apply 12 seconds of renew to its target, while Holy Word Sanctify will apply 4 seconds of renew, which again, the Dragonflight tier set is going to be getting that original interaction with Sanctify and Serenity. And then they also want to increase some of the potency of their single target heals in AoE content. So things like Dispersing Light are going to cause 6% of healing done by heal, flash heal, as well as Power Word Life to also be replicated to 4 injured allies as well, which could potentially give them some really strong single target value and single target output, while being able to have some AoE cleave healing, which could give Holy Priest a very interesting and a different profile. When it comes to the class of Shaman, it's pretty easy to tell that they're universally good. Whether you play Elemental, Enhancement, or Restoration, all 3 specs are amazing when it comes to group content, but because of that, we were expecting some sort of a nerf to hit Shamans at some point in the future, and it looks like 11.1 is going to be making adjustments, one of them being a group utility nerf of removing Ancestral Guidance, mostly because they feel that Ancestral Guidance and Ascendance basically do the same thing for rest of Shamans, so they're removing the talent outright, but they are going to supplement Enhance and Elemental with additional off healing, primarily through the basic abilities, but also even things like Spirit or Healing Stream Totem. They're looking to juice that thing up by quite a bit. I don't think it'll necessarily replace Ancestral Guidance, but if they can make it actually do solid healing to like a 5-man party in dungeons, then potentially maybe turn it into a cooldown that does solid healing and then it essentially has a very, very similar role. I could see something like that work out pretty well. But that is something to expect for Shamans in the future. Some of that group utility is going to be going out of the window very soon. Outside of this, more Shaman improvements are arriving, primarily for Enhancement, but also for Totemic. Both Resto and Enhancement Totemic are going to be getting a new ability with the Surging Totem, which has been a complaint by many that you can't really move Surging Totem easily, and you have to commit a talent point into Totemic Projection to even maneuver the totem, and it's kind of unwieldy to use. Well, for the base ability of Surging Totem, once you use it, it's going to become an ability that allows you to move Surging Totem instead. It'll be a relocation ability with a 6-second cooldown that is off GCD that should allow you to move the totem every 6 seconds a little bit more easily, which is such a massive quality of life improvement. Then we got the spec of Enhancement, which is going through a number of changes, like Primordial Wave ability is kind of going to be replacing the whole ramp up behind it, where you use Primordial Wave, then follow up with a Lightning Bolt to cleave targets. Primordial Wave essentially is going to be replacing it as a one button that does both, where you send out a Primordial Wave and it will just travel to all targets with a Flame Shock, dealing instantaneous damage. But there will be even a new ability called Primordial Storm, where after Primordial Wave, you'll be able to use a Primordial Storm within 15 seconds that will devastate all nearby targets with Primordial Energy, healing them with a Flame Strike, Frost Strike, Storm Strike, as well as unleashing lightning bolts and chain lightnings to targets to be a more effective version that will deal a soft cap of 5 target damage while consuming all of your Maelstrom charges to deal damage, to make Primordial Wave a much more impactful of a button rather than a setup button overall. Your Feral Spirits also being adjusted by quite a decent bit, especially when modified by things like your Elemental Spirits, where instead of granting you physical damage buffs, they instead grant you magic damage buffs. They try to make the wolves a bit half and half, so they'll give you 10% more magic damage of either frost, fire, or lightning depending on the wolves, but also 10% physical damage to make sure the Shamans, whether they play a full Storm Striker, Wind Fury, physical damage build, or more an Elementalist build, that both builds get at least some sort of value with Elemental Spirits while being able to still commit to some form of physical damage. They're also doing a pretty big restructure to Enhancement going forward to kind of soften the damage of the improved Maelstrom weapon damage amplification stacks. So Chain Lightning, Elemental Blast, Lightning Bolts, all of those things are getting lessened, but they're amping up all of your base abilities like Storm Strike by 100%, Lava Lash by 100%, things such as your Ice Strike by 100%, and I believe Crash Lightning by 200. So quite a few damage buffs are being added for Maelstrom builders while reducing some of the power from Maelstrom spenders. Then there's also a class of Warlock, which is getting a number of improvements for some of the abilities that don't really see their full potential, with Affliction, Demonology, and Destruction all getting some sizable but not the biggest changes ever, not complete reworks. They are buffing things like your Drain Life ability, for instance, and I guess I don't have a proper build set up for this guy, but abilities like Drain Life are being amped up by quite a bit in order to make some of those Drain Life components just a little bit stronger, which will make talents like Soul Burn a little bit better, but also things like your Dust Embrace a bit better for Affliction in particular. Speaking of Affliction, not as many players are getting the full value defensively of Soul Rot, which does have a secondary component. Not only does it do a bunch of shadow damage to that main target and secondary targets, but it also allows Drain Life to cleave to multiple enemies to consume their soul, which is kind of part of the Affliction original base AoE burst gameplay with Drain, but there's not enough synergies right now to really make it work, and they want to make that Drain aspect a little more consistent by basically letting Soul Rot drain life for you, so it will actually do a portion of his damage and will return it back to Warlock as healing in order to give it a little bit more of that defensive value without the Warlocks having to go out of the way to get the most out of their Soul Rot drain. When it comes to Demonology, they're trying to make the ability to Doom a little bit better by making it work off of your each Soul Shard spend by Hand of Gul'dan to get a faster cooldown reduction, rather than from demonic core consumptions, which means, at least for PvE content, faster Doom duration expirations and more consistent use of Doom, since they're really trying to clamp down on the demonic core procs in general. Doom Eternal also has been adjusted, so the Doom explorations now have a 30% chance to generate demonic cores, which should hopefully mean even more resources and potentially even better mobility for your Demonology Warlock, since Demon Bolts with demonic core do give you instant cast capabilities. With even further improvements like Demonic Calling having a 20% chance instead of 20% chance to make an X called Dreadstalkers cost no resources and be instant cast, which should hopefully make Demonology playstyle even smoother than ever before. But the expectancy and probably some of the best changes out there right now is Destruction, as they're trying to make more passive versions of abilities like Channel Demon Fire as well as Dimensional Rift, because both those abilities don't really see that much play for Destro unless you play in a very particular build. And they're trying to make those playstyles just a little bit better, just to make sure not to take away from the regular rotation of Destro. So a passive version of Channel Demon Fire will be Demon Fire Infusion, where periodic damage from Immolate and Wither has a small chance to fire a Demon Fire Bolt, while Incinerate has a 25% chance to fire a Demon Fire Bolt, which could be really good in a very dot heavy playstyle to get random Demon Fire getting fired at your targets. As for Dimensional Rift, there will be also Dimensional Ripper talent, where Immolate and Wither all have a small chance to open a Dimensional Rift at the target. So when playing a damage over time heavy Destro build with all so if you're playing a damage over time heavy Destro build that leans into Immolation or Wither from Hellcaller, there could be some fun damage over time chaos to be added into that whole entire playstyle, which could be really fun to play around with. Also, to make the abilities like Rain of Fire even easier to use, instead of just giving Rain of Fire a reticle where you place these Rain of Fires, you can now will be able to have two versions of Rain of Fire, one that still uses a reticle to place it over an area, and another that will be placing Rain of Fire right over your current target, which should hopefully make using Rain of Fire just a little bit easier. However, all we can do right now when it comes to these patch notes is just talk about them and the potential that all of them have when it comes to how they'll be playable and functional once 11.1 is available for PTR, but I really do want to revisit a lot of these once 11.1 is actually here and ready for public playtesting, and definitely give all of these challenges a go, all of these different playstyles a go in some of the dungeon content and other group testing content once the PTR realms finally go live, as there's so many other smaller changes to cover, but for now that's going to be the biggest bulk of some of the biggest ones from the current list of new PTR updates. As always though, I do want to thank all of you guys so much for watching, and I do hope you guys enjoyed this update video. If you did enjoy it or found it informative, go ahead and give this video a like. I would very much appreciate it. Join our Discord community for regular discussions and class updates for the patch 11.1, which will hopefully be up on PTR very soon. Let me know your thoughts about all of these different reworks coming out in the Undermine update, and as always, I'll see all of you guys in the next one.